to our colleagues. There we go. That's my first order of business. This webinar is being recorded. So folks who are on camera, just know that this is going to act as a record of our meeting. I am going to ask all members if you can mute yourselves during this portion of the meeting, just so we can limit ambient noise in the background. And then when if we call on you, if we get a question, certainly unmute yourself. So for folks who don't know me, my name is Allison Brown. I'm a facilitator with JLA Public Involvement and have had the delightful honor of working with the Concord Property Task Force and the Gladstone Library Task Force for the past, I'm not sure how many years now, definitely since before the pandemic and those before times when we were able to meet in person at Concord. So I'm going to act as our facilitator tonight. I'm going to be supporting Jessica with the Zoom logistics. So if anything weird is happening on your end, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Jessica. And when we get to the part of our meeting where we'll be kind of taking questions and discussion, I will just help manage that since we are a bigger group. And that also means that the chairs of each of the groups that are here this evening, you can fully participate. We want to hear your opinions and thoughts as well. So you can come here with your participant hat on, and I'll help with some of the management of the meeting. Certainly not giving leadership direction for it, but just kind of helping with the back end stuff so that y'all can participate in the discussion when we get there. So I think with that, we've got the chat open. Anybody who's on the call, if you want to let me know that you have a question, you can digitally raise your hand. I'll also be watching your faces even during our presentations. You can physically raise your hand as well. You can also let me know in the chat, or you can just drop your questions directly into the chat. We're going to be kind of taking questions throughout the presentation and breaking it up. It's going to be pretty short for questions because we want to make sure that we have time for a fuller discussion. The purpose of this meeting is really informational, but I'll be helping us along the way when we pause so we can get some of your questions if there are clarifications that you need. I know that we're working in a government space, and government and architects both love to use acronyms. So I'm going to have my hat on if we are using acronyms that folks don't understand or you're not familiar with. Let me know and we'll pause and be sure that we're clarifying that. So ask for clarification along the way. We'll do our best to hear from as many of you as possible and make sure that you're getting the information that you need. So I think that's all my facilitatory pieces. And with that, I'll pass it over to Jason.
Hi, thanks, Allison. Thank you all for coming tonight. I hope we can have a good discussion kind of to further discuss what we talked about a little bit back in November. Just in the interest of time, because we do have a lot of stuff to cover, I'll do a quick acknowledgement of who's here. We've got the Concord Task Force attending tonight. We've got the NCPRD District Advisory Committee here tonight, and we've also got the County Library Board attending as panelists tonight. And on the staff side, we've got OPSIS, we've got Liz and Jim, who you all know. We've got Cindy Becker here, Mike Bork, NCPRD director here. Let me see here. Obviously, Allison just spoke, and then we've got Commissioner Savas here today with us. So kind of just to reiterate what Allison said, this is a presentation. We're not asking for a recommendation at this point. We just want to put the information out there, answer any questions you may have about it, so that when we follow up with other meetings, that you have the information needed to kind of figure out what may still be an unanswered question in your mind, and we'll discuss those further. So with that, Cindy will be driving the presentation tonight, so I'll hand it over to Cindy to get us going on it.
Thanks, Jason. Allison, could you make sure you're bringing everyone in? I know Sarah is trying to get in as well. So thanks everybody for coming. Just a show of hands, how many people are here from the Concord Oak Lodge Task Force? Great. And how many people are here from the NCPRD DAC? That's my favorite acronym. And how many people are here from the County Library Board? Great. And we have Liz and Jim here from OPSIS, as well. And Jim and I are going to kind of toggle this. Let me just make sure that, okay. Can everybody see this? Yes?
I
That's a
can
yes.
see it. It's not in presentation mode, but I can certainly see it on the screen.
Okay, I can put it in presentation mode. Can everybody see this? Is this better?
That looks great.
Okay. So as Jason said, this is an informational meeting. We asked for the three groups to come together because we want all of you to have the same information. And one of the things that we learned from the last time we met with you was that there was a lot of confusion about the options. And so really today's meeting is to talk about each of the options that we have discussed briefly before, to compare the options, to talk about the financing, general discussion, timelines, next steps. And so really what we're hoping that you come away from today is clarity about the options. We have, there are going to be follow-up meetings in February for each of the individual groups. And so you'll have a couple, 3 weeks to really digest this information. I want to apologize for not sending this out to you ahead of time. So that's a shout out to Grover and anybody else, but this has been an iterative process. And so hopefully we'll do better next time, but, and you know, we will answer your questions as they come up in each option. And then as we go through the various and comparison slides. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay. So again, the purpose of the meeting, this meeting really is a follow-up from the December 2021 policy session we had with the board. Prior to that policy session, we had met with several of the groups, and basically the message that you all sent us was just you need to stop and delay until we have a really better understanding of what the issues are, what the options are, and what we need to do next. And so based on those messages, we recommended and the board approved that we would delay this project and work with you to identify options that align priorities in design and funding. The three options we're going to talk about today are the original master plan / schematic design option, which was the attached library and community center. The second option is a attached library and a reduced scope community center. And the third option is a freestanding library and reduced scope community center. This information, by the way, this PowerPoint will also be put on the website, so you can get that as well. Okay. Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to Jim. He is going to go through these options with you. And Jim, when you want me to move a slide, just make sure you say that, and then we will have these conversations with you. Everybody said thumbs up.
I see a hand from Natalie. Natalie?
You're on mute, Natalie. You're on mute.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Natalie.
Oh,
There we go.
there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
The PowerPoint presentation is not showing up on my screen anymore.
Hmm.
Natalie, are you calling in on you're on a phone or tablet?
I'm on a tablet.
Okay, we might need to scroll through. I think, but I can still see it on my computer, but maybe Jessica or I will send you a message. Are you able to see chat messages?
Let me see. Nope.
Okay.
Oh, wait, chat 2. There we go. Okay.
We'll try and get you sorted out, Natalie.
Okay, thank you very much. All of a sudden it went away.
Oh no, we don't want that.
So the way these options will be presented is in the same sequence. And so Jim, you want to start out?
Yeah, be happy to. For most of you, you're very familiar with what we're calling option one is the, as stated, it's the master plan vision, and where we left this at schematic design. And I'll just kind of start with the outdoor park and parking amenities. As you all know, the primary parking lot is to the what we're calling Plan South, the bottom section of the site. And then the top area of the site's really relegated to obviously the existing Concord School, which will be transformed into a community center slash library interconnected in this plan. And then the primary park amenities are on the left side of the site. And just going back to the parking area, we're creating a really nice inviting drop-off area that will have a lot of accessible parking stalls, a drop-off area that would be shared between the school or the community center and the library. We're creating a shared entry plaza and a new accessible entry to the Concord School. As you know right now, the primary access is really through the stairs, grand stairs. And we certainly want to preserve those stairs and not create an entry that's going to compete with the architecture of the Concord School. So the entry really kind of migrated more to that southwest corner, and it's a shared entry and lobby between the community center and the library. The community center includes in this option, a pretty full renovation, and then an addition of a gymnasium that's on the back side of the existing Concord School. And then direct connection to the library. The addition that you see here in green, we had landscape that wrapped around the library, these bay windows that oriented towards the south, a water feature that we're not sure if that necessarily makes its way into the other options, but in this option, not only entry plaza, but water feature. Probably the primary element, two elements of the park is the playground, an accessible children's playground. There's also the open play field, a walking path that goes around the perimeter of the park, enhancement of just natural landscaping and trees, what's referred to as the pavilion or park shelter. It's dotted in. In this option, it was always carried as what we're referring to as an ad alternate. It's not necessarily in the base scope, but if the funding allowed, the contractor would bid on it, and hopefully it could be included in the project. But we're designing it in this option, and then showing its location. And then one of the other, couple other features to note is there is a set of what we call kind of stadium steps, almost amphitheater-like seating next to the library that makes up what is about a 11-foot elevation change. And then on behind the library, there's a parking area that is also working as a fire lane access, probably more service type parking that would provide service access to the community center as well as the park for events. So those are the kind of the primary features. There's also a smaller parking area towards the northeast corner as well. More of a service access, could be staff parking. And that's, really where we left the plan. So hopefully that's all pretty familiar. We can go to the next slide. So this is a little more of an enlargement that indicates that in blue, the community center area, in green, the library, and then the shared space, which includes the entry lobby, restrooms, some mechanical space and circulation. So this is how we've come up with the square footage numbers that are in the upper right-hand corner. The overall square footage of the library, including the 50-50 breakup of the or division of the shared space, equates to 19,950 square feet, a number that was certainly an original target. And then the community center total area is 44,700 square feet. So we can go to the next slide. This is an enlargement plan that just kind of identifies some of the features and elements that are in the library. You can see the shared entry, some of the furniture for lounge seating. There's an elevator that's part of this lobby. And then included within the existing Concord building in renovated space would be a meeting room that's indicated with the arrow, and then the workroom for staff, which takes up kind of the west side of what was the original addition on the Concord School. That includes offices, workspace, and then what's highlighted in the ellipse circles within the plan of the library are service points. One that's located right next to the entry when you come in. And it also has a direct connection back to the workroom. That's really important. You know, one of the elements of this particular layout is with the addition going to the west and the workroom more within the library, it really requires 2 service points. And so that's why we're indicating and highlighting the other ellipse that's more on the bottom left side. There's indicated the children's area, the teen area, the collection that's kind of in the center of the library. There's meeting rooms towards the north, includes historic room, and then there's a nice variety of lounge and seating areas, primarily towards the south and then also the west. So that's kind of the highlights of the amenities of the library. We can go to the next image. So this is really focusing these 2 drawings on the amenities within the community center program. Starting on the left side, level 1, the new lobby space. You can see the library areas in green, the restrooms. In this case, you're seeing that behind the accessible, universal, or all gender inclusive restrooms, there's the addition or renovation of locker rooms that would happen with the new gymnasium. And very clearly the gym, you can even visually compare the existing gym and stage area to the new gym, which is significantly larger and would have bleacher seating and demising curtain, and really allow a variety of activities to happen there. And of course, to make that gym work, we need to have the locker rooms. Towards the bottom of that plan are the NCPRD and recreation offices. And then in the light blue is kind of a light renovation area of kind of support spaces. And then going to the upper level, as you come up the elevator or the existing stair that is on the west side, you come up, there's a recreation check-in area, teen zone that's to the bottom left. And then as you go up the into the what was the original addition to the school, there's a community room. And one thing to note there is you can see the community rooms a wider dimension than the typical classrooms. So one of the things we are proposing here, as you know, was modifying the structure to create a wider dimension for the community room, and then creating kind of a breakout lounge seating area adjacent to it. There would also be a warming kitchen adjacent to that community room. And then as you go along the east-west corridor. As I mentioned, the recreation check-in, there's the existing gym, which is really envisioned to be kind of a multi-purpose space. By having the new gym, there's more opportunities to even host performance events and other community gatherings, music and so forth can happen in that space, especially with the stage. And then there's group exercise and multi-purpose rooms. So that's kind of the overview. Probably went into more detail, but some folks here are new and maybe haven't heard a description of some of these spaces. So that's kind of it. You know, we can open up, I think, for questions, Allison.
Yeah, let's take a few questions. And folks, I really want to focus on like things that aren't making sense, any clarifications that you might need, and I'll look for hands or anything that folks put into the chat. Some questions here? Question from anybody? Okay, we did get a question, I think, from somebody who's here observing our meeting. I want to be sure that we're prioritizing questions from task force, or excuse me, from any of our group members here that are panelists, but Gavin, we'll save that question as well. Natalie's asking, what about elevators?
Yeah, there, as you're probably, for those who are familiar with the Concord School, there is an existing elevator. It's more towards the right end of the plan. On the level 2, you see the word multi-purpose. Next to it is a small elevator. In this plan, off of the main lobby, we're proposing a new elevator as well, and it's kind of abbreviated here. It says new elev, and if we were to spell it out, it should say elevator. But that's a new elevator that would be proposed in option 1, while maintaining the existing elevator as well.
All right, I also see a hand from Gary and a question from Ben. So why don't we go to Gary and then Ben?
My picture kept moving around as chasing the mute. On the schematic for the library in this option, are there restrooms in there?
No, well, I should take that back. There is a restroom for the children's area. Basically, typical one stall restroom, and then there's also another restroom right next to it that would be for anyone in the library. So there are 2 dedicated restrooms within this footprint. Gary, they're located up towards the top half or north half of the plan. One of them, you can see there's a little symbol of a sink and then a turning radius and a toilet. So those are the 2 restrooms. And then the idea is that the other restrooms would be shared between the community center and the library.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And let's go to Ben.
Thank you. Can you scroll back to the site plan that shows the entire site with the parking lot and the park? My understanding of the site, there's like a lot of funky elevation changes, and I guess two-part question, and they're not super related, but one, like, well, how much square footage is reserved for the playground? And then 2, how does the different terracing work in the site, like with the parking lot to the playground to the pavilion above, and what kind of thought has gone into kind of visibility, sighting, safety, all that kind of fun stuff?
That's a great question, Ben. And one of the things that we've done in this plan is to kind of abstract it. There's a lot of thought and detail that Lango Hansen, Kurt Lango and his team has given to the grading. This plan's intentionally kind of simplified to be more of a diagram, so it's not indicating exactly how it's at all really how the topography is working. That playground, the library addition is roughly 9,000 square feet. That playground's probably about 8,000 square feet. It's a good size space. Kurt could give you a more precise number here when we get to, further along with questions and answers. I'll make sure he verifies that. And a lot of thought has been given to the grading. In fact, some of these meandering pathways are really incline ramps, and they really aren't ramps. From a code perspective, a ramp is a 1 to 12 slope, and that means every 30 feet of ramp, you need to have a landing. These are kind of inclined pathways. So there's no need, they're a 1 to 20 slope or even less. So they're very gradual. And the idea that when you see the monumental steps next to the library, that kind of V-shaped circulation is actually a ramp. So there's even a little bit of elevation above the playground. As you know, there's some topography between what is now the open play field and the lower elevation. So without going into a lot of detail, the topography's been very carefully considered to make it really seamless, minimize, any retaining walls as much as possible, and to make it very accessible to everyone. Really thinking about this as being universally accessible. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
I see a hand from Anita. Did I say that correctly? Thinking Hanukkah, Anita?
Anita, great. Congratulations. Thank you. This is a minor detail, but since we're talking about the elevation and the outdoor space, I've been told that as it currently is set up, it's a great place to watch the sunset. And I just wonder if that could be, folded into the plans, and maybe it has to be given up because of lots of trees and whatever, or maybe it could be part of what's incorporated into the garden design.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. And it definitely can be accommodated. That's a wonderful experience. We wouldn't want the park design to take away from it. And so I know Kurt Lango's taking note on that. We haven't got, even this plan's schematic design in a more abstracted version. So we know we want to plant trees, but we also, there's a variety of tree types. And, there's a lot of opportunity to make sure those view corridors and vistas are preserved.
I see a hand from Leslie as well, and then maybe we'll move on to the second option. Go ahead, Leslie.
I have a question about this parking behind the library. There is a big retaining wall there, and I guess it's, oh, you can't see me pointing at the picture.
Okay.
Anyway, at what level is that parking, and how do you access it? From the street?
The parking, I didn't mention that, but the parking's accessed off of Spalding. That's the street that runs through the neighborhood. And so it'd be basically at the same grade as the site is right now. And as you're referencing towards the east or towards the Concord School, there is quite a bit of elevation change there. And so, we would be sloping the site down, and there may be, some modest retaining wall, but not drastically changing really what exists there right now. And then the library is really kind of tucked into the topography. So the back wall or north wall of the library would be a retaining wall.
The back wall of the library becomes the retaining wall? Is that?
It does, yes. It's part of the architecture of the building. Yes.
So that parking is above the library?
Correct.
Okay. So
yeah, just as a point of reference,
looking out the back windows.
Yeah, there would be high clear story windows. And just, I don't think I mentioned this, but from the entry plaza up to the parking area or the back wall of the library is roughly about an 11-foot grade change. So
No, you mentioned that when you talked about the stairs.
Okay, sorry, I I just want to make sure that was clear to everyone.
I have one more question that I have never had sufficiently clarified. When you walk into the entry plaza, that has to be dug out because today
Mhm.
this level 1 is under the current, okay. So in order to get to the new library from that entryway, that library has to be underground. The walls are, when you look out the windows, you are standing below the ground around it.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And so, you've been in the Concord school and, at the ground level, the grade's up roughly about 3 feet. So you're looking directly into the landscape. That would be the experience on the south side of the library. In many ways, could be a really wonderful experience too, because you're kind of one with the landscape. And that's the approach here, that the library is at the same grade as the ground level of the community center with the shared entry. And so the library is about 3 feet, 30 inches to 3 feet tucked into the ground on both the south side as well as the west side. And then the grade comes up higher as you go up the stadium steps.
And does the retaining wall that's necessary as the back wall of the library,
Mhm.
does that add additional cost that wouldn't be there if you were building that same wall, not as a retaining wall?
Well, retaining walls more, but you also don't have to worry about any sort of exterior skin on the material on that wall. If that was a fully exposed wall, you would be putting a nicer finished material than raw concrete on it. So there's a slight cost premium, but there's also the savings of not having to clad that wall with an exterior material, if that makes sense.
Is dampness going to be a problem? Which I have
Oh,
heard
there's-
exists in the current school, but
Right. Well, things have come a long way in terms of,
yes.
protecting concrete walls. There's, a membrane. There's, there's a liquid finish that's applied as well as a membrane. It's pretty bomb-proof, really.
Okay,
So we're very confident that that's a non-issue. There, frankly, there's lots of buildings that are tucked into, topography, and we've come a long way with technology in terms of addressing that.
okay, thank you.
So folks, I see Anita's hand up again, and I know that Rose had a question in the chat. I also want to be sure that we're looking, we have enough time to look through each of the 3 options.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask that we pause on questions. Anita, if possible, you could pop your question into the chat, and I think Liz might be able to answer some of the questions in the chat as we go through. I also maybe want to put it out there. This might be a Cindy Jason question. Gavin, who's observing our meeting, had a question in the chat earlier, like, why are we looking at these different options? And I think most of the folks on this call are aware, but maybe as we transition to looking at our second option, could you maybe just give a brief, for anybody observing who might not be totally clear as to why we're looking at different options, kind of what's the genesis of this and why are we approaching it this way?
Yes, no, that's a really good point. Oh, Cindy, please.
Yeah, let me just, the reason that we're looking at these options is that during the summer, staff became aware of the fact that I shouldn't say became aware, that the available funding that was pledged, I think, when this project started, when staff really turned the rocks and really looked at everything, realized that several of the assumptions that were made for the funding of the community center were proving not to be true. And so because of that, we were tasked with looking at other options that were less expensive and more in line with both where the community wanted to go, and keeping the design as as true as possible, but really making it in line with the available funding. And so we will get into more conversations about the specifics of the funding a little bit later, but even more in depth when we get into the individual group meetings. So the reason we have these options is because the original project was not deemed financially sustainable.
So that's a good lead in.
The original project is number 1, right?
Correct, correct.
And what you just said, there's not enough funding for that option.
Correct.
So, okay.
Yep. So that led us to looking at a second option, number 2, still keeping the attached library, but looking at a way to reduce scope of both the library community center and overall just cost reduction. Some of it has to do with, even how we construct the building and so forth. So here's the overall site development plan. I won't go into as much detail. It should look really familiar. There's 2 changes to note here. On the community center, we're showing the gymnasium as a future gym. So that was one of the methods to be able to reduce costs. And then the other element to note is the library footprint is smaller. The addition is. We reduced about 7-8 feet on the north side of the library, and then also on the west side of the library. So we will later show a comparison slide, but you might note that there's more landscape in this site plan around the north side of the library as well as the west side of the library, which could be viewed also as a really positive thing, that there's more landscape amenities around the library. That's really the only, one other change is overall site development. As you'll see, we aren't indicating the fountain or water feature. So we can go to the next plan. This plan, I'll start with the community center portion of it. Because the gymnasium's considered a future or an addition to the building or an add alternate, the idea of building out lockers really isn't required at this point. We'd want a plan for them, and it's all designed to occur just as we're showing in option 1. That's really the primary difference between what we saw previously in this plan, as well as I mentioned the amount of area, a little bit of reduction on the library to the north and then to the west. You can see here the accounting of the square footages. If you can go back, sorry. One, please, sorry, I didn't mention it, but the library, instead of 19,950 square feet, is reduced to 17,000 square feet here. So there is a reduction in square footage, as I described. The total community center is 36,800 square feet. So a reduction of roughly about 8,000 square feet for the gym addition.
And
Okay.
just hate to interrupt you, but as folks are looking at these diagrams, and especially the one that you just shared, which direction is north, just so they can orient themselves?
Well, that's a good question because the site is in true north. So we are calling the bottom of the slide south, the top of the slide north, to the right of the library west, and to the left west, and then to the right east. It's not that simple, but that's how we've been referencing it, which could be confusing to people. A lot of people consider what we're calling Plan South actually the west elevation. So good question. So this is option 2 on the library layout. The area inside of the Concord school, remains the same as option one. There's a meeting room, there's the workroom area, the entry, the service point desk near the main entry is same as we showed before. Having a second service point is also retained in this option, even though it's reduced in square footage. We kept the teen area and children's area. Really, the layout of the library is very, very similar to before, except that we've just reduced some of the square footage here. And that primarily has to do with the overall collection, not so much, a little bit with seating area, and maybe the reduction of one meeting room, but essentially it's a very similar layout that you saw before. Some of the things that we looked at are, simplifying also some of the shaping on the south side. That's a way to save money. With the cost of wood right now, we're looking at a steel structure, steel roof frame. That doesn't mean there isn't a wood ceiling up there in terms of acoustical wood ceiling. So there's a lot of subtle things that aren't in the plan, but were a way to reduce costs. And we go to the next plan. So this is the community center layout, very similar to what we had before in option one. The only difference, and I kind of mentioned it before, no gym, and then the locker room area would be kind of preserved as we wouldn't change that space, but it's ready to go for a locker room renovation. In this option versus option one, we're looking at a lighter touch on some of the renovation spaces. There may be very similar to option one, but perhaps a little bit less if there's areas where we can not move walls and, just do a lighter touch. The thought is there's some of that to consider as well to kind of rein in some of the overall project costs. So that's it.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. Gary, I saw your hand earlier, but I think that was the comment that you asked in the chat about including a true north symbol on the graphic so that folks can orient themselves that way. We did have a question from Mark in the chat that Liz answered, asking in option two, would each function, the library and the community center, have separate MEP systems? I'm curious if you can maybe answer that verbally, but also clarify for folks what an MEP system is.
Yeah, that's a mechanical, electrical, and plumbing system. And yes, in option one, we were utilizing some of the space within the existing Concord school for kind of a shared mechanical area. As we started to look at ways to create more efficiencies and reduce cost, we're looking at a freestanding mechanical system for the library. So it's independent of the Concord school.
There would be shared spaces though, the yellow that we were talking about.
The yellow area would still, yes, restrooms would be shared, and then some of the circulation. One thing I want to mention too, because there was a comment brought up, and maybe I preserved that to option three, but NCPRD is committed to moving in to this building. That was a question raised the last time we all got together. So whether it's an attached library or, as we now go to option three, a detached library, freestanding library, and reduced scope for a community center. You can go to the next slide. The plans of NCPRD are to move into this building to operate it. Michael Bork, who you've all met, is very familiar with working within constraints of an existing building, and being creative of how to program it. And then looking to make in this option modest finish and renovation to the existing school. But I'll mention here, and this is really important, that part of the budgeting at this point is to consider still doing the new accessible entry to the community center. In this case, you can see there's a freestanding library. We aren't looking at the library being pulled into the parking lot or sitting in front of the community center, which some of you may remember those freestanding library options from the master plan. What we're trying to do is build on the good qualities of the master plan work that you all agree to, but to think about some of the great qualities that happened when we were attaching the library to the community center in terms of its location really works well in terms of having a shared entry plaza, creating a new accessible entry to the community center, just like we were proposing before, but in having a nice lobby when you walk in, but really having a much lighter touch on the other improvements to the community center. We'll go through that in a little more detail later. As you can see in this layout, there's a 20-foot separation between the community center and the library. That allows windows to happen, both the existing windows in the community center, but also, you know, a nice window from the meeting room, for instance, back towards the Concord School. One of the things that we've changed here from the option 1 or 2 is lifting the library up. The comment brought up earlier about the library being tucked into the topography of the hillside there. So what we're doing is having stairs and accessible ramp right next to the stairs. And the whole library is lifted up now 30 inches. That's that kind of magic dimension of where you can have a ramp without having to have a landing. So by lifting it up 30 inches, the retaining wall on the back side of the library now is 8.5 feet tall instead of 11 feet tall. So there is some cost savings there. We also think there's some nice aspects to this in terms of the library having an independent, strong identity, being lifted up slightly, gives it even a little more kind of presence than it would have if it was at grade. The other thing you'll see is we've wrapped a little more landscape around the library. The library footprint is larger, obviously, in this than it was when it was an addition. And what we've really given up in this plan is the stadium steps. As you know, those were located on the plan west side. So what we have now is really thinking about more of a garden environment around the library, and then kind of carving into that zone and creating a plaza area that might even have a little bit of an amphitheater quality. There could be an opportunity for the library to open out to that space. It also has a connection to the children's playground. In this particular layout, the children's playground is slightly larger. And you'll see it's kind of subtle, but we think actually really impactful is the entry plazas maybe a little bit smaller here. We don't have that landscape island in the middle, but what we have is really kind of a panhandle of the park extending out to the drop-off area. The drop-off area is kind of shifted a little bit to the plan east. So it really is centered, the drop-off between the library and the community center. We still have the ADA parking. So we're kind of excited that the sense of the park actually begins kind of where the landscape starts next to the library. So that's a little bit of a different feature. Another thing that happens is the parking has been reconfigured off of Spalding. And so it's more of east-west orientation of parking still works for a hammerhead for the fire truck, provides that service access of parking. But the parking doesn't feel like it comes as far into the park. So in many ways, we think this is in many ways kind of a natural evolution or modification to the master plan that from a landscape perspective, we think kind of does some very positive things. So this is the plan of the Independent Library, the community center. You can see the metrics above of the square footage. The community center is 44,700 square feet in this plan versus previously in the option 2, it was more like 37,000. So the overall square footage of the community center has increased between option 2 and 3. And from our experience doing a number of libraries as well as community centers, this size of community centers is fairly modest in scale. And the discussions with Michael Bork and his team is that they won't have a problem programming this. And then the library has decreased in size from option 2 to 3, from 17,000 to 15,000 square feet. Go to the next plan. This merits just a few moments of discussion. As you see, this is a more compact plan. Off of that entry plaza where you see the stairs and the ramp coming up, there's a zone that's kind of typical of a lot of freestanding libraries where you'd have the restrooms located right there, book drop, a meeting room at the end of really kind of a public lobby that could be an after hours lobby too. So you can actually close off the main part of the library from this area. So you can either open it up early or have late extended hours where the meeting room can operate independent of the rest of the library. Kind of a nice feature. And then you'll see the workroom. We've found a way to make it a little more efficient. And one of the key features here is that the service desk, because of the compact plan, we only need one service point instead of 2. So operationally, that's a more efficient layout. And the sight lines from that service point desk are very optimal, straight across to the teen area, to the teens, and then meeting rooms are grouped next to it. And of course, the general collection and seating area. So go to the next plan. And then this is the community center. To note on the plan on the left side, level 1, the accessible entry, a really nice lobby area, recreation offices to monitor the entry, perhaps a welcome desk of sorts. And then a variety of exercise rooms or event space that works within the constraints of the existing classroom spaces, future gym capabilities. The rec offices being located there is really great too, because eventually there's a corridor leading back to the gym, which offers sight lines and better supervision. And then of course the upper level, which hasn't changed from what you saw in option 2. That's it.
Cool.
I guess
Well,
questions?
yeah, I think we might have had Cindy. Oh, go ahead, Cindy.
People have been asking about this. The next set of slides is going to compare the 3 options on a variety of different levels.
Okay. So some of these questions were, I know we had some questions about option 2. I think we moved on to option 3 before we got through all of those, but I see folks are asking questions about library square footage, and my sense is we're going to go through all of that. Also want to clarify, Kim had a question. Kim, I appreciate this. Are we going to talk about the cost of each of these options in this meeting? And the answer to that is yes, that's also coming. So I want to see if anybody has any kind of clarifying. Well, why don't we go through each of the 3 options all together, and then we'll see if any of your questions are clarified and come back together. I'm taking note of what you've been putting in the chat too, folks, so keep them coming. All right.
All right, terrific. So we'll move on to discussing comparisons. So This is probably a helpful graphic where you can see the 3 site development plans next to each other. And as I mentioned earlier, the amenities are very similar. You know, in some ways you're getting more park space around the library. You can see the comparison of the playground area, slightly larger in option 3. The relocated drop-off zone that's centered between the library and the community center. And then you can see also the reconfigured service parking area off of Spalding, how it's a little more long and linear, and in a way visually takes up less visual impact on the park. We can go to the next plan for comparison. Go to the next slide. So this is a comparison of the library area, and this starts to show you the square footages. Down below is the overall square footages between option 1, option 2, and option 3. And then you can see the comparison of the addition, which is shown here in the darker green color. The addition with part of the renovation, you know, the dark green area, you can see the comparison of the square footages. One of the things to take note of is the collection size. The current collection size is between 56 and 56,000 square feet. In the option 1, the collection size was 74,000 volumes. In the reduced option 2 is 63,000 volumes, which is still more than the library currently has. And, you know, conversations with Mitzi, and she's available for questions, I believe, too, might be even more preferred right sizing. And then what's interesting in option 3, even though it's 2,000 square feet less, because of the more efficient layout, we're able to achieve the same number of volumes that we did in option 2. We can go to the
Jim,
next.
Also, just if we can go back to that library slide, I know that there was a question earlier that Mitzi
sure.
helpfully included. The current, and this is a pop quiz for everyone, the current Oak Lodge Library is 8,722 square feet, according to Mitzi. Okay, cool. So 8,722 is what you've got right now in comparison to those 3 options. Cool, just want to make sure folks have that information. Thanks,
Yeah,
Jim.
thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so comparison of the community center. Obviously 2 levels, so it's a little more complex to take it all in. But you can see the big difference is the future gym in options 2 and option 3. One thing to note is because of the comparison of option 2 to 3, the square footage goes up because the full Concord school is available for the community center. And then I think we can go to the next slide. So this is kind of a more detailed breakdown, which I think is a really helpful graphic, comparing the library in option 1 to the library in option 2 and the library in option 3. As you can see, all the boxes are checked. We're not losing any of the amenities between option 2 and 3 and the original option 1. A couple of things to take note of, and I think I mentioned it in the plan. As you look at option 1 and 2, when you look at the line item for service points, there's 2 service points versus only 1 in option 3. So that relates directly to operational efficiencies of the library layout in option 3. There's also study rooms. We were showing 4 in option 1, but reducing those to 3 in options 2 and 3. And then lastly, fewer staff offices, 1 less in options 2 and 3. And as you can imagine, that just has to do with smaller footprint and operational efficiencies. You go to the next slide. Yes, there's a Friends bookstore space in all three of these. Yeah, that's an important amenity that it's in all the plans, and probably we'll make sure it's included on that matrix. Community center space comparison. This is a little bit more complex. You can see all the X marks in the program for option 1. When you get to option 2 and 3, there isn't a gym included at this point. Perhaps a little less recreation monitoring space. Locker, and one thing to note in option 2 and 3 is that the plan is to utilize existing layout spaces with some improvements, more minor improvements and remodel, but to still provide the amenities that were being offered, with the exception of the gym and locker rooms that you were getting in option 1. So when you get to the community room, you can see there's asterisks here, smaller room, but still providing that amenity with a warming kitchen. There are lots of classrooms, probably more than we were able to get in option 1. Major remodel of all spaces, that is certainly a highlight of option 1, with more minor remodel in option 2 and 3, with the provision that that could still happen in the future with some additional funding. A new accessible entry is integrated with option 1 and 2, and an improvement that would be part of option 3. But option 3 would utilize the existing elevator and not provide the new elevator at this point within the budget constraints that Cindy will share. And then there's new accessible restrooms in the first 2 options, and a potential improvement in option 3. The mechanical, electrical, and plumbing and seismic upgrades are partially achieved in option 2 through kind of incremental construction as one goes in a remodel space and wants to insulate the walls, then seismic work would happen at that time. And then the degree of seismic and MEP improvements is really to be determined in option 3. Go to the next handoff here, I think. Oh, no, one more. On the park space comparison, as you saw, they're very comparable with the exception of the splash pad in option 1. And that's not proposed as part of option 2 or 3.
So I get to do the fun stuff, right? The financing. What we have shown here are the 3 options, what the costs are, breaking up, the library and the community center. The library costs in option 1 is projected at 17 million, and option 2, 16.5 million, and option 3, 17.4 million. Somebody may ask why, if the square footage is smaller in option 3, why does it cost more? And the reason it costs more is we're talking about building new space as opposed to option 2, which has some of the space in the community center, and that space would be renovated versus built out new. So the cost of renovating versus new is the difference. The available funds that we have for the library are 14.8 million. You see those across the top, consistent across all 3 options. And then we show the gap between these. In the community center, we have the initial costs of 28.8 million. What we've done in option 2 and option 3, there are still some decisions that need to be made. And so we've given you a range here as opposed to an exact number. And then the available funds stay the same in all three of these. One of the things that I think is important to mention in options 2 and options 3, although the community center would not have the makeover, if you will, as you've seen in option 1, we're really looking at a phased approach. So it doesn't mean that what happens in the community center, choosing option 2 and option 3, is all that's ever going to happen. It's important to understand that we're looking at a phased approach so that we can align it with the available dollars. Again, this is something that we have, I think, shown before, but it's to show the available funding, where it's coming from. One thing to note in the Oak Lodge Library, the library portion of the revenue bond, we are probably going to recalculate it so that it is prorated with the square footage of the Gladstone Library. There's one revenue bond for the 2 libraries, and we just want to make sure that we're apportioning the funding for that in both libraries. Apportioning, excuse me, in accordance with the square footage they're going to have. I'm going to stop a minute because I think there's probably going to be questions. Anybody have any questions on this part?
I think we might have a lot. So I know that we have questions kind of about overall plans, and then Cindy, are you asking for questions specific to financing right now, or should we kind of check them all as they've come in?
Why don't we see if anyone has questions about the plans first?
Okay, cool. So I'll start to go through. I see the hands coming up. I'm going to circle back to some of the folks that dropped questions into the chat and make sure, one of the questions that maybe this is a Jim one that Mark had earlier on is like, why do we have to reduce the square footage of the library in these options? And maybe you can just say a little bit more about why that's happening.
Yeah, well, I think as Cindy mentioned, building a freestanding library, all new construction, is more expensive than when you have the benefit of renovation space with new addition. So for instance, a lot of the additions that you were seeing were 9,000 to 10,000 square feet. Even the freestanding library, 15,000 square feet. So it's more expensive than utilizing 5,000 or 7,000 square feet of remodel space. So that's kind of the primary difference. Cindy, do you want to add to that? Okay, great.
Cool. I know that there were some questions about the future gym site, and I think that Liz answered a lot of those in the chat. So let's take some of the hands that I've seen. So kind of going in order, I think Kim and Ben and Grover and Mark. And just so folks observing the meeting know, I know we've gotten a lot of questions from folks who are here observing. See them, I think we're answering them if we can, but I'm going to prioritize questions from the folks who are our panelists here on this meeting today. Sorry, Kim, go ahead.
Oh, good. So this comment is with all respect out there. I certainly understand the position everybody's in, but I think that from my perspective, certainly, and I think a lot of the task force members' perspective, there's been a kind of a bait and switch, and there's a lack of trust at this point in the project. So when we're talking about a phased approach, if we were to recommend an option 2 or an option 3, how can we feel certain that that's actually going to happen? What assurances are being offered at this point in time? And what are the actual plans and steps that would allow us to believe that a phased approach would happen here?
Well, I'll just say, I'll speak probably the simple part of it. Architecturally, we can, be smart into planning and make sure that it's set up well for it. Logistically, and I know this isn't the nature of your question, but I'll just give others time to respond. But one of the nice things about this layout is with the shared entry plaza and the parking all towards Plan South, and the gym being the addition on the back. The contractor building that gym could come in from the back side of the building, do remodel inside the existing Concord school, and then build the gymnasium. And what's kind of neat about that is it doesn't impact the library or the park. All that type of logistics of construction can happen without impacting the park. So a minor thing, but actually a big thing, you know. When you do face construction, it can also mean you have to partially close operationally part of a building down, and that's not something that would be desirable. So I think that's kind of intrinsic to how the site lays out into this plan.
Thanks, Jim. Mike, can you talk a little bit about the future plans for the community center?
Yeah, thank you. Mike Bork, for any of those that I haven't had a chance to meet, NCPRD director. Keeping in mind, and I hope the graphs and comparison showed that the major difference in price cost between option 1 and option 2 was the level of build out, as Jim talked about. Because of the level of seismic upgrades that were planned in the original option 1, they were going to be going in and gutting the building from basically to the bricks and rebuilding everything. Option 2 and 3 indicate, like it said, our plan on that is to look at what we can afford for strategic seismic upgrades, but leave the existing historical feel of the building essentially as it is, both outside and inside, because as I understood, history is a big part of this building. And so making paint improvements and making flooring changes, maybe knocking out a wall here or there to make 2 rooms 1 big room, those are all things that we want to do, not as part of a large construction development plan. The library in option 3 would be the big development part that would be getting constructed. But again, our plan would be, as some of you may know, our lease comes up with the county this July 1 for the amount of rent that we're paying to them, and we're outside of our district. I would like to be moving into Concord and starting to use the building as a community center, not necessarily going full gangbusters right away. It'll be a ramp up as we get the building fixed up and made improvements, but to do that almost immediately without waiting for the library to start breaking ground. We know that'll happen, but there's processes behind that, and we can be operating a community center long before that happens. And yeah, we may have to adjust our schedule of availability once the project starts a few times to allow for big equipment or things, but that's part of any project in the scheme. What we're looking at is the initial investments on any of these. When we say the 7.7 million is not just to improvements that would be made to the building, because there's a lot of shared costs, and Jason can speak to these more fully of, we're sharing the cost of the civil work and parking lot. We're bearing the cost for the playground and the park and a lot of the landscaping stuff. So when all of that is taken into account, and we add the soft costs that we've already borne and are expected to bear for any future stuff, that pretty much eats up that 7.7 million. So when we're talking about phasing, what we intended is we start a community center as soon as we can within a few months, and then we engage the community again, because the parking lot or the playground and the new play area and playground and park area can take a fresh look. There's no specifics on what that's actually gonna look like. It's just a conceptual design. So we can engage with the community on what is that actually gonna look like when the library starts getting constructed and the rest of that happens. And at the same time, what do we want to look at for a future set of improvements to the Concord building? If we're using it as a community center, does the community really want it gutted and built out brand new, or put our money towards things like a new gym or maybe major renovation of one part of the wing? All of those are conversations, and that's why there's this question at the bottom, or this note at the bottom, that these are estimates right now, because we're still trying to pull some of those things together, and it's not something we can parse out of the option 1. So
Just comment on that. All due respect, the community has spoken a lot on this and has decided what the community wants already at this point in time. So when we're talking about phasing at this point, it sounds like you're saying phasing into a gym, possibly in the future. It would be the phasing here, that there's not necessarily steps beyond that. The idea is to put lipstick on the community center, do some like very minor seismic upgrades and move in within a couple months.
no, you're missing the part of then we engage with the community once we're in there, because I have to find another place to live or spend another couple $100,000+ on our rent at the county buildings. But the idea is if we're moving in there, we're already operating out of that facility. We're running programs in the gym. We were running day camps out of that facility. There's things going on in the Concord building already. Our idea is we would move our offices in there, make those minor improvements, paint, lighting, and flooring makes a huge difference in what a building looks like, while still retaining the walls and windows and everything that's in there. After we're up and running and the library is moving, then we engage the community of what are the other improvements that are needed that we can actually put into a future phase.
Right. The point that I'm making is that we've been spending a couple years discussing with the community what the community wants.
And there's a lot of factors that have changed in the last few years, namely the Happy Valley withdrawal and COVID. And so this financial position that other directors and leadership may have been in 2018 is not what I walked into in late 2021. And when I looked at the budget, when I understood how our budget operates and what we had for reserve funds, what we had for bondability, what we had for these other factors, that's when I had to make the call that we couldn't afford to take on our own revenue bond in the tune of $13 to $20 million, depending on how much of the gap we would have to fill with a revenue bond. The pure truth of it is at a $13 or $14 million revenue bond, that's $1 million in debt service. And in the last 3 years, with Happy Valley's withdrawal of about $1.5 million in tax revenue and $2.5 million in revenue loss from just COVID-related revenue losses, we're not in the same financial position that we were a few years ago. I'm not saying that we won't get back there. And one of the options that I'm still looking at is what opportunities do we have for a general obligation bond to fully fund the whole thing? But that requires a vote of the district. It's not off the table, but we had to be talking about what options we think we could move forward that are realistic and affordable with what I know right now. And I can't apologize for what other people have said in the past. I've tried to be very transparent about what our financial situation is for the district, what our tax base is, what our general fund status is, and what our capital status is. And we just can't take on additional debt. Operationally, we're doing okay, but we just can't take on additional debt right now in the form of a revenue bond where we would have a large debt service. And I know that's not probably the answer anybody wants to hear, but that's the reality of the situation that I came into last August when I started.
So this is an important discussion, and I think these are things that we're going to get into in a lot more detail conversations when we have the follow-up meetings in February. I certainly appreciate that frustration, aggravation, and lack of trust out in the community because of the significant change in the numbers. I mean, this is not a small rounding error. And, we are trying to be a good steward of the money we know we have with looking at what can we do? What are the plans to be able to increase or put in additional improvements in the community center? Are there other questions about this?
There are a number of questions. So I see some other hands. I just want to hold kind of Kim. Let's put a mental post-it note there. I think that this conversation will continue with your task force and when the DAC meets. So I see Ben and then Grover, Mark, Dennis, and Christy. And we've got about 40 minutes left in our meeting. Well, 30 minutes for some questions and we'll talk about next steps. So Ben, over to you.
Yeah, it's tough to follow that. And, I feel for Michael stepping into this situation, and obviously Kim and members of the task force, all the volunteer time you all have put into it. I respect all that, and commend you all for sticking with it. And it's a bitter pill, and I hate following that situation, but I just want to make, these big projects are complicated and take time. So whether it's phasing or not, I don't feel like I'm in a position to comment on that. I'm a member of the NCPRD District Advisory Committee, and I kind of, design parks and playgrounds for a living. So I feel like I can comment on and bring to the conversation is kind of what I see right now. And I hope this is helpful. Of everything I saw, whether you do option 1 in phases, 2 in phases, or 3, I hope that the park design in those 3 can get divorced from the buildings, because the option 3 I saw, there was so much good entry sequence and connection with the building that I saw versus the first option. And whether you do option 1 or 2, I feel like in option 1 or 2, like the park was doing its own thing and the buildings were doing their thing, and they're divided by this east-west line with the grand stairs. But the final option showed this really great promenade and entry that respected the going into the park was just important as going into the buildings. And whatever way the fundings and phasing goes, I hope the future movement really respects the entry into the park and the connection from the park to the buildings, as was shown in option 3. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Ben. Let's go over to Grover. And I also want to note that Grover had a couple questions about had a question about seismic. That's also come up a few times in the chat. So before I move on to Mark, I want to be sure that we clarify those seismic questions if you're asking other questions right now, Grover.
Great, thanks. Yes, I actually did. The idea that the old building was going to be completely gutted was not at the top. I don't disagree that that's evidently what was planned, but I thought a lot of the trim and so on and so forth was going to be included. That's piece 1. But the idea, it was to address the seismic and how the 2 buildings could connect had a seismic concern. And the fact that the building needed, and there had been years of discussion about the need for seismic upgrade. So holding that, I'd like to hear some answers about that, but I want to tie that to funding. Case in point, several of us have been involved in this for 8 years, 9 years, where the focus has been on to fulfill the offer made to the members of all of Clackamas County was that we would start a library district, and library district would then raise new tax dollars, which would go for library operations. And there were 3 county libraries that need to be dealt with. One is Hoodland, it works with Sandy. The other was a freestanding, fully paid for, debt-free library given to the city of Happy Valley. And then there was the Oak Lodge Library. And to look at how the county now, all these 14 years later, has saved a significant amount of funding that it used to put into parks. There's not a nickel anywhere I'm seeing in here that's coming from the county in this process. And I'm speaking specifically about the library part. And then, so I'm concerned about the seismic and safety. And are we actually just going to keep hanging out in a building that doesn't meet current seismic standards? Second of all, the funding from the county. And then lastly, I didn't see any pieces where our library right now, less than 9,000 square feet, there's insufficient meeting room in there totally. And I don't see in either of option 2 or option 3, well, particularly not in option 3, but I don't see a significant amount of meeting space and community space being built into that, and a lot of small rooms. So, and then the last thing I have a request ongoing. Can all the questions that not all of us are watching that are put in the chat and the answers can be posted on the website as an aftermath so we could be able to see them and others can see them, as opposed to, I'm missing half the stuff in the chat. So those are my issues, and I don't know who can answer it about the funding from the county, and I don't know who can answer it about how safe is that building as it is currently.
Thanks, Grover. I can just note, I can take that last one. Yes, the chat will be certainly a part of the public record and a part of the summary today. That's an easy one.
And put on the website so other people can see it. That's the part I'm saying.
Yeah, and that'll be
Great.
accessible on the website.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Should we start with seismic? Is that, who would like to respond to that one?
I'll take that.
Jim? Okay.
Yeah. Well, part of seismic, oftentimes, when you are working on a historic or older building, and the use changes in a way where the type of use and activity increases in terms of the necessary improvements or safety issues. We aren't forced to do anything right now because the use of the building was a school, and now it's a community center. So you may all recall, some of you anyway, we had our structural engineer come to one of our early meetings, and he explained a lot about the levels of seismic improvements. So the point is, because the use isn't increasing in intensity with the community center, it's totally voluntary. So that doesn't mean you don't do anything, obviously. And so there's ways you can incrementally do seismic improvements. Probably one of the primary things to do would be to make sure the roof trusses are more secure to the exterior walls. That's sort of like the initial step. And then there's strategies to create what are referred to as shear walls, or more very stable walls that are support the lateral structural integrity. And that can happen incrementally. It doesn't need to happen all at once. And so I think the approach in options 2 and 3 is more of an incremental approach to addressing structural improvements. Also, as you know, the building's uninsulated, on the exterior wall. So as you might recall, putting metal studs up along the exterior wall is going to help the structural integrity. And that's also an opportunity to insulate those walls. But that's pretty invasive work, as Mike Bork was kind of mentioning. And so the idea is perhaps that happens more incrementally. So if we're redoing a lobby area, any sort of, as Mike said, moving walls to open up two spaces, because the comment you brought up, Grover, about small rooms, yes, you can remove a wall, but if you're going to do that type of work, you're probably going to do some seismic upgrade at the same time. And so the idea is to incrementally get to the end game, but to do it incrementally. And exactly what that is, or that roadmap, I mean, we haven't figured that out yet, I mean, this is pretty, these strategies of pulling back, we're working our way to what would be an optimal solution. But that's a strategy that the seismic can happen incrementally. And at subsequent meetings, we're happy to bring Jared Lewis, our structural engineer, to have offer a more detailed explanation of how that works. You also mentioned small rooms. Yeah, there are a lot of small rooms. They're classroom size, which isn't a small room. I mean, they're good sized rooms, but as Mike Bork said, many of those walls, really, that I'm aware of, those walls are not structural walls. So you could open them up and create a larger group exercise room.
I think
Or
you
a larger
about the library.
space. Pardon me?
Do you talk about the meeting rooms in the library?
No, I'm talking about the Concord School.
Right. Yeah, but I think Grover was talking about the library, sorry.
Oh, you were? Oh, I'm sorry. So I'm unclear on your question.
Okay, well, what I was speaking of, in our current library, we are just, it's a horrible place as far as having any place to meet in any way effectively. And I don't see any significant enhancement or improvement in the newer options. So that's for the library.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Cindy. I was going in a different direction. Yeah, the library in option 3 has a large meeting room that's comparable to what we had in options 1 or 2. But in options 1 and 2, that large meeting room was within the existing Concord School. So we're still providing that large meeting room. It has the benefit that it can be separated from the rest of the library and operate for extended hours, have access to restrooms. So in many ways, it's a very desirable meeting room, and we're still have a series of smaller meeting rooms and historic room and all the things that we had in the library in option 1 and 2.
Thanks, Jim. Now for that final part of Grover's questions, and then we'll move on to some other folks who have been waiting about county financial contributions to the project. Cindy, is that you?
I guess it is. So this has been, I'm sorry for losing my voice. County has said at the policy session that was held in December that they are committed to funding this library, and they understand that the available funds may not be sufficient. And so they are waiting for what the final recommendation is going to be. And at this point, they're committed to funding it, the library.
Before I move to Mark, and get your questions, I just want to elevate for folks who aren't paying attention in the chat. I think Christy had her hand up and is also taking care of some other things. So added in some comments into the chat, just expressing really deep frustration with this and disappointment in this process. And that was echoed by Doug. Thank you for those comments. And just want to reiterate for folks, again, this is your information session. It's a lot of stuff. I think everybody recognizes that you'll need more time to talk this through. And Christy, thank you for kind of expressing your feelings and telling us what's going on for you. And certainly your co-chairs, Doug and Dennis, for the Concord Task Force will be kind of taking care of the agenda, setting the agenda for your next meeting. And just want to say that we hear you. And thank you for sharing those comments in the chat. And for the other groups that are here too, same thing. Your chairs will be able to set those agendas and create space for additional discussion on these topics that you're reviewing today. Okay, let's go to Mark and then Dennis and Deborah.
Okay, well, thanks, Allison. I think we're having a great conversation. And I just wanted to start by saying, you know, when this task force was put together now 3.5 years ago, that the first question we were asked was whether the library should be here or not. And so in my view, the first priority has always been the library and not the community center. That is second, in my view. I'm not going to say everybody's view, but at least in mine. So, you know, I appreciate, Jim, that you put the best rows you can or best foot forward as far as how, you know, the library functions can be handled in a reduced square footage, but I really don't think that's the point. I think the point is that there was a reason why we came up with the square footage that there is for the library. And Commissioner Savas has spoken to this a couple of times, that there is a formula that was used to come up with the square footage for both the Gladstone and Oak Lodge libraries. This was not arbitrary, in any way arbitrary. And so there is a reason why it's the size it is. And so it's difficult for me to accept that we're going to reduce the square footage of this library because we're short on funds. I have difficulty with that. And so I would really challenge the community or the County Board of Commissioners to pony up the money for the full square footage that was allocated for this library in the very beginning, before they ever agreed to reduce the square footage of the library. And the library square footage is totally independent of any of these options. The square footage can be retained in any of these three options without any impact to the community center. I would say that I think that the phased approach to the community center makes a lot of sense to me, because there is a problem with the funding, and we will have a building to meet in, thank God for that. And whether we have a new gym or not is really a function of money and time and allocation. So I really want to hear more from those on the library board and those on the task force about whether we accept reducing the square footage of the library under any terms whatsoever. So that's my take. Thanks for letting me.
Thanks, Mark. Let's go over to Dennis and then Deborah.
So real quick, we had that financial page up there with gap money in red, the red money. Where is the red money coming from? Is that county commitment to fill in whatever those gaps? And just to follow up with Mark, I kind of agree about the library piece. It seems like the library is all tangled into this other stuff. And it goes way back before my time with this committee, 3+ years. So I can see the community being super upset that you're going to get a new library, but it's going to be about the size of the old one, which I think people are feeling growing pains in the old library. But it's that gap money. We're still doing the same thing. We're talking about proposing a plan that's over budget. So I'm real interested, where does gap money come from?
So I can speak to that in a minute. The current library, I think, is about 8,500 square feet. So all of these options are significantly larger than that. Dennis, were you going to say something? Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
So the gap money for the library will, depending upon which recommendation it moves forward, that will go to the board, and the board is committed, to funding it, as far as I know. If we came with a $10 million ask gap, I think that would be an issue. But if we're looking at a couple, $3 million, I think that from what the board has said in the December meeting, and maybe Commissioner Savage, you want to mention that, but they have said they're committed to funding the library.
Oh, okay, then I like the original plan then, as far as the library goes. But I appreciate that. I hope that's the case.
I think it's important to understand the difference between, again, the library and the funding available for the library and the community center, because the community center is a part of the NCPRD, that is an NCPRD facility, and so there is a difference in terms of the Board of County Commissioners and their commitment to the library, and then the funding available to the community center.
And I do see a hand from Commissioner Savas, who's here this evening. Commissioner, I think your hand's up to respond directly to that, and then I'll get to Deborah's question.
Sure. Well, I thank you all for participating, through this long journey. And for those of you who are new, thank you for being here tonight. And I appreciate our staff kind of giving you somewhat of an update. It was my hope that today, or by today, we would actually have some chronology as to the funding, where we were, where our mindset was, our funding plans, maybe in May or June, and then as things went along, how it got to be where it is today as far as the gap growing. And that was for multiple reasons. Number one, to identify what part of that is inflation due to the COVID and the supply chain issues and all that, and eligibility for ARPA or other kind of federal funding because of that, possibly, and what other ancillary cost escalated it. If there was a mistake made, when was that mistake, and what is the monetary amount of that mistake? So today, you don't have that, I don't have that. I'm trying to understand that. It was my hope that we would have that today, both on the library side and also on the community center parks aspect side of it. You know, there's three elements, at least I can see here on the NCPRD side. That's the park itself. You know, that's the community center and it's the gym. So I don't know where those escalations or if there were errors made, where they were, but I want to get that identified, because, you know, if there's opportunities to get funding, outside funding or funding from the state or whatnot, I think we need to be able to understand how we got where we got and be able to explain it transparently to everyone. I think we owe all of you that. And I'm committed to finding out, getting that answers. And again, I was hoping to have that here today. The funding gap, as I can see it and understand it and hear today, is for the library is far less perhaps than the NCPRD elements here. But for those of you who have been around long enough and maybe went to some of the public meetings during the discussion about Happy Valley's withdrawal and what would happen and the financial impacts, we were pretty transparent about that. We knew we would see about a $1.5 to $1.6 million hit to the general fund of NCPRD when they withdrew. But the strategy was to actually make that equal amount in cuts so that the district would remain whole financially. That was publicly shared. For those of you who went to some of those meetings, handouts were given. Rose Villa, for example, was the venue for work. Some of those materials were handed out. That was publicly discussed. So the way I see it is that, you know, if there's a patchwork perhaps on the NCPRD side, if there's a patchwork of funding that is partly bonding, it's partly ARPA for the elements of that, and maybe possibly if the board, again, this is all dependent upon the board. I am not a single decision maker by myself. I need, you know, we need the board's majority vote on anything we do. And we certainly need to understand the finances. Mike Bork has been helpful in trying to learn and share the finances of the district. I'm learning more. He's assisting with that, and our other staff in finance of the county are also assisting with that. So I'm having conversations almost every day, trying to reveal, you know, where we are and how we get those gaps. But until we understand the nature of those gaps, I'm going to have a hard time explaining or making an appeal to whether it's a state representative or whether it's one of our congressmen or whatnot. We need to understand what those gaps are and what dollars are eligible to fill some of those gaps. So I'm looking at this with rose-colored glasses. I don't think, frankly, that I think we need to paint the picture that we can get there from here rather than we can't get there from here. So I'm trying to put a positive spin on it, but I need more details. We need more details. And I'm hoping I know you will. We're all passionate about this project. I'm passionate about this project. You know, we need to make it move forward somehow. And, you know, the whole idea of joining these two things together, the library piece and the Concord piece, was to experience and enjoy the savings. So we can end up with a better asset in the long run. And to parse it out, I think all those benefits might be lost if we start doing phasing, because there's mobilization, there's a lot of cost that'll be lost. So I, for one, would like to maintain the library at the original size, but the question is there an option where we maintain the original size, but it's separate from the NCPRD structure? But you've got three options here. I'm not going to interfere with that. I've said a lot. I don't want to eat up more time. I want to hear from you. So I'll conclude my thoughts there. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. All right, so we just want to note in the chat that Joel had a question about the formula that Mark had referenced when Mark shared his thoughts, and Mitzi included the settlement agreement that does have that references how square footage was allocated to both Gladstone and the Oak Lodge Library. Let's go to Deborah and then Leslie, and then I think we'll probably have to start to wrap up, and Cindy will talk us through some of the next steps. So Deborah, thank you for waiting patiently.
Yes, well, some of the comments sort of have given me pause, because I think when we are tasked with choosing an option, we want to make sure that that is the option that's going to happen, and not something more fluid. I I want to echo what Ben said about the park area in option 3, which I think makes it more accessible, a bigger playground and so on and so forth. So if we choose, let's say we chose option 3, can we be sure that that's what that park area is going to be and not something else, something that gets further and further modified? This gets back to what Kim was talking about in terms of credibility. So that's mainly what I have to say.
Thank you, Deborah. Let's go over to Leslie. Leslie, go ahead. I think you went back on mute.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah.
I've been looking at some history of the parks that we have, and I learned that, well, first of all, in 2019, the Metro government had a ballot measure that asked for more money for parks. And the voters said, yes, here is more money. I believe that it was focused on buying new park lands, but in the past, the Stringfield family park was developed using Metro funds, according to Metro. In addition, the trolley trail had a big funding boost from Metro. I believe that was in a prior bond measure. The actual right-of-way was purchased with funds from that ballot measure by Metro. And where are they now? If you look on the NCPRD website describing what's happening with the Milwaukee Bay Phase 3, it says that they have a grant for $750,000 that comes from, I believe, the state of Oregon Parks and Recreation. Where is Metro? Don't we get some of their money? Don't we get some Oregon State Parks and Recreation money? I would think that there would be, that people would have done work on this. When you're making a project budget, where's all the money going to come from? And these are very, seems very obvious places to look. So I just am asking, I guess, has any research or inquiry been made to these places that have money that go to parks? We should have some.
I see both Mike and Mitzi and Jim want to respond. So why don't we start with Mike, and then we can get Mitzi and Jim too.
Thank you, Leslie, for your question. The short answer is yes, Metro has been consulted about the Concord project. And in our funding plan, in fact, there is a small amount of money set aside for potential Metro funding. But in the conversations with Metro, just because one project gets funding at a higher level than another is dependent on what Metro's qualifications are for the project. And when they came into the site visit, that the Concord project, except for potentially, I believe it was Parks and Pathways portion, would only qualify for a very small amount. And so other funding options have been explored as much as staff has been able to explore. One of the things is we know that Land and Water Conservation Fund funding is going to be coming open again soon. There's potential that we could help offset the costs of the park and playground areas by getting Land and Water Conservation funding. But again, there's a lot of competition and there's a lot of criteria that some projects meet and some don't. Metro specifically was here on site. They looked at those projects and determined that the Concord project itself did not meet their requirements for the Metro partial funding. So I know there's a lot of complexity to that, but we have explored as many other funding options as we can for anything to do with both parks, playgrounds, or renovations of existing old facilities. I'll let somebody else talk. I know there's a big line. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Go ahead. Mitzi, did you want to jump in there too?
I just wanted to respond to some of the questions about the square footage of these plans. And, you know, a lot has been said about that original commitment for 19,500 square feet for the Oak Lodge Library. And I just wanted to point out, if you take a look at that master plan, there's a fair, the option 1, there's a fair amount of that space that was shared. I think it's like 3,800 square feet of that was shared space. So actually, when you're looking at the net of the library space, it's more like 16,000 square feet. So we are looking at comparable spaces. They're just slightly different. You know, in some of the plans, there's a bathroom within the a bank of bathrooms within the library. In the original plan, in the master plan, we were sharing bathrooms with the community center. But we are still looking at a very comparable space in each of these plans. And I did also want to note that we do have a rather tight operational budget, and that this should be taken into consideration when we're looking at each of these design options. If you refer back to slide 21, there was a nice comparison that showed some of these issues that we need to be considering, such as the size of the collection. You know, the more books that you have, it costs more money to purchase the book, to process the book, for the staff to check the items in and out. You know, so there are things to consider with each of these plans, even from an operational perspective. And now we have a slide up, and you can see that in option 1, we had it at 19,950 square feet, when actually 3,800 of that was really shared space. Yes, it included the shared bathrooms, but the net of that was more like 16,000 square feet. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitzi. I just want to check in with Jim before we kind of pass it to Cindy to wrap it up for next steps. Anything you want to add in there?
We were getting short on time, and I just wanted to make sure we heard from Mitzi, actually. So thank you, Mitzi. I'm good. Thanks.
Folks, I'm going to pass it to Cindy to talk a little bit about next steps and some of the things that are coming up. I also want to note, just facilitation wise, if there were a lot of questions in the chat and a lot of responses in the chat, to Grover's point, I want to underscore that we'll be copying and saving the chat from tonight's meeting. It'll be attached, it'll be part of the public record for tonight too, and that should all be accessible online, I believe, in addition to the recording of this meeting. So if folks do want to go back and reference anything or share it, it should be available for you. But Cindy, tell us a little bit about some of the next steps.
Well, one thing I did want to mention is the projected timeframes. We did not put specific dates, because this all depends on when a decision is made to go with whatever option. And so the actual timelines between options 1, 2, and 3 are comparable, except you'll see more time spent in options 2 and 3 in design, because much of the design work was done in option 1. And then there's more time it's spent in construction in option 1 than it is in options 2 and 3. But one thing I think is important to note here is that the ARPA dollars, the $750,000 that was designated for this project by Representative Power, does have a clock associated with it, because if the money if we can't show that the money can be spent by June of 2024, that money will go back to Representative Power, and she will allocate it to another project. And so while we don't have to have the project complete by June of 2024, we have to show that we are able to spend those funds. So again, that's an important consideration as we do the deliberations. The next thing that is really important is that we have meetings scheduled. The NCPRD Advisory Committee has their meeting on the 9th. The Library Board has their meeting on the 17th. And we're hoping, we've put Oak Lodge Concord Task Force meeting on the 16th. We threw that time out, and hopefully we will confirm that with the task force, but we're hoping that we can do that with you. And that will be an opportunity to, I'm going to stop share for a minute. that will be an opportunity to go into more discussion and go into more detail. If we need to bring some of the other folks like the landscape person or the structural person into some of these meetings, we can have that. We will certainly be talking with the chairs to see what other information they would like. But it is an opportunity to talk more about these, and from that meeting, we'll decide if we need another meeting or if we can make some recommendations from that meeting. Our intent is to go back to the board in April if we can, but if we need to take more meetings in order to do that, we will. So February is really the next on the agenda for all of the committees. Any questions about that?
There was one question from Dennis, just asking if these slides will be shared with folks. I believe that the answer is yes, that these are part of the record for this meeting and that
Yes,
they can be out.
They are already posted on the website, so you can access those slides immediately.
Cool. And I just want to note Doug's comment in the chat that there will be opportunity for public comment at these follow-up meetings that Cindy just outlined in February. So folks who are observing, that's there too.
And thank you very much for saying that, because this is a little bit of a different, this wasn't your formal meetings where there would be agenda and public comment. This really was, as we said, an information. We just wanted to make sure that all three groups had the same information. We may have different opinions about it, but at least we have the same information to start with. I can tell you that, as they say, I mentioned this hasn't been a walk in the park, and we wish that all of this, all the funds that were originally talked about were there. Whether they can be there again, Commissioner Savas and others will certainly be looking into it. But we do hear you. We understand the frustration. If there was a way that this didn't have to happen, believe me, we would all be really happy about that. So we're trying to find our way out of that and to come to some solutions and recommendations that make sense.
I apologize. I was busy getting the link to those slides. I think I might be able to put those in there.
One question. I'm sorry. Yeah, one question is how will the option decision actually be made? We will be collecting information from the three groups, and we will provide that information to the board. Staff will make a recommendation, and the board will see the staff recommendation, and they will see the community recommendations, and if whether they are in alignment or not alignment, they'll see all of that information.
Thank you, Cindy, for that. We have 2 minutes left in our allotted meeting time. Are there any final questions from any of the folks on the call, or anything that we missed over that we need to be sure to answer before we end for the evening? Okay, your nonverbal body language and your lack of hands raised seems to indicate that we're good for now. But remember, folks, you'll be reconvening shortly in February to pick up this conversation and continue it. So I'm sure that there will be a lot to say. And just thank you all for attending tonight. It's so lovely to see so many of you. Deborah, I see your hand, I think. One final question to slide in there. Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
I know, I was trying to get unmuted. Given that, okay, the three different groups are going to be meeting and getting public input, is there a way that this whole group can meet again before the BBC makes their decision? So that those of us, I'm on two groups, but not on all groups. And that way we can all hear what information and background we got from other people that are listening in on our group, as opposed to other groups. So I guess I would like to ask, I know it's not a fun thing, but to reconvene all of us so we can share the input that we all got.
As far as the county staff are concerned, absolutely. If that is the wish of the 3 committees, we can certainly do that. Can we say a show of hands to see if folks want to do that?
Seeing some hands raised. I'm seeing some body language that indicates, maybe. But looks like I've seen quite a few hands around the room. So it looks like there is some interest from folks in getting back together. Thank you for that. I see a hand from Natalie. Natalie, you have a question?
Not a question. I just wanted to second what Deborah was saying. I would like it as well for all of us to be able to reconvene before everything is presented to the Board of Commissioners.
Cool. Thanks for that, Natalie. All right, Doug, I read your body language when you raised your hand, but looked like we might have another meeting altogether for folks, if that is still the desire of the 3 groups after you get an opportunity to meet together. So it is lovely to see your faces, folks. I know that these are not the best circumstances to be meeting to discuss, and I know so many of you are, this is a much more than a passion project. It's something that you've been working for actually years on, and your dedication to your community and to these projects is so deeply appreciated, I know, by the folks on this side of the room. And I appreciate you showing up in all the many, many ways that you do show up and bringing this passion to this work. So not the best time to be meeting to discuss these topics, but again, it's really wonderful to see you. It's always a privilege to be able to work with you and to hear your thoughts and opinions, and thank you so much. And for those of you I haven't met, well, it's great to sort of meet you virtually in this space. So perhaps we'll be seeing you soon before information is presented to the board. You'll be looking for those meeting invites if you haven't gotten them already for your individual group meetings and picking up those conversations there. As always, get in touch. For folks, if you have any additional questions outside of this meeting space, and for folks who are observing the meeting, if you do want to download those slides or any of the members here, that link is in the chat, but you can just look on the project website for the Concord property, and that meeting link is on the right-hand side of the page, and we'll give you access to the presentation so you can review it in more detail. Okay, Cindy, Jason, Jim, any final words? Cool.
Good to see everyone.
Yes, thank you all very much. And
so much.
Yeah, we will meet again.
Yes.
We sure will. All right.
Bye.
Take care, folks. All the best. Bye.